Very, very definite attitudes toward every phase of alcohol, toward alcoholics, toward alcoholism, even toward drinking, toward drunkenness. In fact, toward alcohol itself. Our attitudes come from our parents, from our religious background, our cultural background, but above all else from our contact with some alcoholic. Every one of you knows an alcoholic. In fact, at least 5 of you live with one actively drinking. In fact, that there are a minimum of 3 active alcoholics here. Face it, that's just a statistic. So many of us will die from cancer, so many of us will die from other things, so many of us will die in accidents, so many of us will die of alcoholism. A fact, it is the #1 health problem in the United States. Hugh Downs on the Today Show was the only other man besides myself who has ever had the nerve publicly to say that he firmly believes, as do I, that there are a minimum of 18 million alcoholics, every one of whom seriously affects a minimum of 6 other people. Good heavens, industry calls it the $1 billion hangover. But let's examine some of the background sources of our attitudes. We are all right here products of the so-called temperance movement that was born in the United States about a century ago. They went very quickly from temperance to abstinence. Because, you see, they went from a condemnation of alcoholism and alcoholics to the next very logical step, condemnation of drinking, and then those who drink. And then a kind of insanity. Intelligent people passed a moralistic judgment on an inanimate object. Alcohol is evil. And some of us were raised with that notion. This is very intimately wrapped up in our religious background. Orthodox Jews hardly know what you're talking about when you mention alcoholism. They are raised, 1, with proper attitudes, and 2, they do not tolerate drunkenness. You get drunk once as a Jew, and then you're accused of being drunk like a Gentile. Race. Let's take the Jews. They are raised almost from birth and have been for centuries on wine. The American Indian had no past cultural usage of alcohol. He was a sitting duck for alcoholism. We're all here old enough to remember the Saturday afternoon B movies. The chiefs called it firewater. The West was not one with the Winchester rifle. It was one with barrels of whiskey. It wasn't Bill Cody and Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok conquered the West. It was Jim Beam and I.W. Harper and Old Granddad and a few of those fellows. Let's take this aspect of it. Islam forbids the use of alcohol. American Mormonism forbids the use of alcohol. Of Arabians who drink, 1 out of 3 becomes an alcoholic, and of Mormons, 1 out of 2, because those who drink, drink with guilt. The attitudes in this country, good heavens. Go to a football or baseball game and watch the reactions to a drunk. There is no single reaction. Some people laugh nervously, others say, isn't that funny, etc., etc. Dean Martin says whiskey, and everybody falls apart laughing. The Jew just sits astonished at such a thing. You know, would you laugh when automobile is mentioned? But again, above all else, our attitudes are formed basically by our contact with some alcoholic. There's a nurse in Baltimore who has done about 12 years of work in emergency rooms. Her definition, which she gave at a seminar about 2 years ago, what's an alcoholic? Hers was this: an alcoholic is my uncle. No parents, she was raised by an aunt and uncle. The uncle was an alcoholic. He was also the world's worst. Wife beater, child beater, and so on. Significant was this: that's what she saw every time a sick alcoholic was wheeled into the emergency room. That's the way she treated him. Alcoholism is the oldest disease known to mankind. It is the most complex and the most devastating. It affects every single facet of the human person, body, mind, emotions, and soul. And it's the illness about which we know the least. Face it, ladies and gentlemen, what you know is what you see. And what you see is alcoholic behavior. And face it, it's obnoxious. What we don't see is what we don't see of an iceberg, what's hidden. Most of us are enamored of causes. With this in mind, and we waste billions on psychiatric treatment which is given and received at the wrong time. I'll discuss that a little later. But what happens is this. Our reasoning says if he knows why he drinks, the problem will disappear. Now, let me ask you this. Did any of you ever go to a dentist? Doctor, this tooth is killing. Tell me why it hurts. You don't. Get the drill. Get the drill. Make it stop hurting. You may indeed know the molecular structure of all the goop that goes into your mouth and the composition of enamel and pulp and dentin and everything else and the interaction of the two. So what? That does not make it stop hurting. And knowing why he drinks doesn't make an alcoholic stop drinking. After he has stopped properly, knowing why he drinks may keep him sober. But it has little or nothing to do with getting him that way. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Of the 18 million alcoholics in this country, there are about 500,000 sober ones. The fact, 1 out of 36 gets well, the other 35 die. They just die. So what we're here for this morning is to find out a little bit about alcohol and then about alcoholism. And as was indicated, the information is not I can boast of it because it is not my own. It came from a little doctor who was himself a recovered alcoholic. He lost everything because of his drinking, beginning with his license to practice medicine. From there, he went down. And he wound up in the gutter on Michigan Avenue in Detroit. But he got well, and he went back to the top of his profession with this difference. He dedicated the remaining years of his medical life to the treatment of alcoholic patients, and he treated over 6,000 of them. Now, this little man knew what he was talking about. And even though the problem is complex, the answers are very simple indeed. And I hope that just as I was, you will be impressed by the genius of this man's simplicity. I think that in this realm, our brains get in our way. I have noticed this personally in AA. I have met many people too smart to get sober. I've never met one too stupid to. Never. The trouble with the human animal is his brains get in his way often. Anyway, Doc Green used to begin at the beginning. The things we drink and why. It is important to know. The first thing that crosses human lips is water, and it is drunk to fulfill a need. Slakes thirst. It's drunk for the simplest of reasons. The second thing is milk, and it too is drunk to fulfill a need, the maintenance of health. Do you remember from your high school biology classes, the scientist classifies us as milk drinkers. That's what we're called in textbooks. We are mammals, from the Latin word mama, breast, the source of milk. These two beverages, since necessary, are quite natural, but we drink other things for other reasons. We're introduced, usually when we are young, because of a preference for sweetness in the taste buds that are very young, with something sweet. Soft drink, hot chocolate, cocoa, anything. And the reason, again, is a simple one. It's different from these two, but it is still simple. Did you ever notice that most professions or disciplines have their own jargon and vocabulary with which they try to dazzle the rest of the world with their intellectual footwork? You know what the scientist says? This is drunk for oral gratification. Now, that's a 7-cent phrase. It means it tastes good. And that's exactly why it is drunk. It pleases a desire. It simply tastes good. Then we come to the first beverage. It contains a drug, coffee. And the drinking of coffee is learned. You know why we have to learn to drink it? It's not necessary and doesn't taste good. Well, why in the world do we learn to drink such a thing? Well, the first reason is the simplest of all, curiosity. The big people drink it and don't give us any. And when we get old enough to ask, we're told we can't have it. When we ask why, they say it's not good for you, so we want some. So somebody will take a little coffee, cut it with milk or cream, add a little sugar to make it somewhat pleasing to taste, Take a sip, you're doing just what the big people do. That's your first step out of infancy, is drinking a big people beverage. Custom dictates its use. Just as tea is drunk in other countries, coffee is drunk here. In fact, the coffee break is so customary that I think it's written into some labor contracts. And then there is this social aspect that is hardly definable, this business of conviviality. By the way, I hope you noticed I was talking while I was writing that word. Many people think that great achievements consist in degrees after your name or promotions and so on. I consider that a major achievement of my life. It took me 3 years to learn to do that, to keep the... Anyway, then we come to alcohol, the drinking of which is also learned. But to get to this conviviality thing, I skipped it. It's the coffee break. You are not thirsty. A sip of water takes care of that, but everybody else is sitting around, conversing and exchanging ideas, and so you have a cup of coffee too. There is a social aspect to the drinking of coffee at certain times. Alcohol is not necessary and doesn't taste good. We acquire a taste for it, just as we acquire a taste for raw oysters or olives or whatever. Some people drink until they die, never having acquired a taste for it. What are the reasons that are given for drinking alcohol? There are external and internal pressures, both of which are strong. The first is curiosity. Again, the big people drink it and don't give us any. We're told it's not good for us and so on and so forth. Somewhere along the line, somebody's going to take a little whiskey, cut it with water or ice, add a little sugar to sweeten it, a little garbage to color it, take a sip. We're doing just what the big people do. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I presume that most of us are fairly intelligent. We educate our kids to think this way. We do it with our sophisticated 20th century law. When you're 21, you can drink. That's why half of you here, and perhaps most of your kids, will sneak out of a prom to take a drink of beer or whiskey. They never dream of doing this with a Coke. We've educated them to think that way. It's the big people drink. It's the big shot thing to do. And that contributes to attitude. Custom dictates its use. Before men knew how to write, that's the way they made contracts. Your drink was binding, just as was a handshake, just as is a signature. It's customary to drink at births and deaths and weddings. We toast the bride in champagne. Wakes, holidays, celebrations, graduations, holy days, feast days, fast days, Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. You can go right down the line. It's customary to drink. And conviviality, important, vastly important. And it's far more conducive to conviviality than all the coffee grown. Take a room full of, let's say, 75 people, and you don't know each other too well. Everybody's a little stiff, pardon the expression, and formal. Circulate a couple of gallons of martinis and stick your head in the same room about an hour or so later. Everybody is about as convivial as they can be. And they're quite at ease with each other. There's a biochemical reason why that is so, and we'll see it in a minute. Alcohol is drunk for escape. Now, forget all the background ins and outs of psychiatric reasoning. I'm talking about normal people with normal problems. You want to get away from them? Take 3.5, 4 martinis. The problems are still there, but they don't bother you now. And there's a biochemical reason why that is so. And for those who can take it, it's marvelous. Here in the United States, about 1 out of 8 will become alcoholic. The other 7 can drink until their death, enjoying it. In fact, Scripture refers to wine as the gift of God that gladdens the hearts of men. Tensions, frustrations, anxieties, jobs, husbands, wives. Take 3 drinks and just settle back for a couple hours. It's wonderful. Pain is a reason given. In fact, beer and wine have been beverages from the beginning. Distillation, what produces whiskey and gin and the so-called hard stuff, wasn't discovered until fairly recently in the history of man. And when it came into being, it was used as medication only. But now it's a beverage, and I strongly suspect people who use pain as their reason for drinking. Say, what'd you get drunk last night for? When you get an answer like receding gums, you know there's trouble. There's trouble. There's a fellow in AA over in Baltimore, he's sober 17 years. Now, when he was drinking and couldn't make it into work, he'd call in and say, I got to go to the dentist, get a tooth out. He was sober about a year, and he and his boss were talking about his drinking. And the boss opened his desk drawer and pulled out a sheet of paper. He said, Ross, you know, when you were drinking, he said, you had 75 teeth extracted. He did. Here's what I mean by Dr. Green's simplicity. Euphoria is why the human animal drinks alcohol. That's a 32-cent Greek word that means a sense of well-being. This is why you spend $2 for a cocktail. You could buy a case of orange for the same price. But that little old glass with 2 ounces of booze in it does what all the orange in the world can't do, makes you feel good. And here's where he used to argue by the hour, by the week, by the month, and by the year with his medical colleagues. The answer is just too simple to be true. I demand complexity. It isn't true at all. Now, why do you want to feel good? Now, you can fill psychiatric libraries, but that's why the human animal drinks alcohol. Now, fascinatingly enough, the chemistry of alcohol. Don't let this scare you. Alcohol is a chemical composed of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. I know no chemistry. I flunked it in college. I know that H2O is water and K9P comes from the south end of a dog, and that ends my knowledge of formula. Alcohol is not a food and has no food properties. There are no minerals, no vitamins, no proteins. In fact, the stomach can't digest it. The stomach digests what it's in. Beer, for example, is about 5-6% alcohol. The rest of it is food stuff, but the alcohol itself is not digested. It's oxidized by the liver. But anyway, basically it's a solvent and one of the best in the world. It'll remove stains from tables, stomachs, bankrolls, marriages, jobs, friendships, lives. It's the best. It's erroneously looked upon as a stimulant because of the wacky things people do when they drink it. I would guess that at least a fistful of you think alcohol stimulates because of what people do when they get a couple. But it isn't. It's an antiseptic. The nurse purifies arms or legs or wherever she wants to stick needles before she sticks the needle in. For centuries, it was the only anesthetic that mankind had. It's a poor one, and we'll see why. When wine was offered to Christ on the cross, it was meant as an act of simple human kindness. Cheap wine was standard equipment in the execution kits of the Romans who killed people by crucifixion. Basically, in its drinkable form, alcohol is a sedative drug, and alcoholism is addiction to it. Now, that's the whole morning in a sentence. Alcohol is a sedative drug, and alcoholism is addiction to it. I maintain firmly and strongly we know nothing of addiction. Nothing. The only thing we can do is describe it. That's all. And treat it. But what it is, God knows. And usually he won't tell. All addiction is characterized by compulsive use of the addictive substance. And that's why the drinker that you know drinks the way he does. He doesn't will it. He drinks that way against his will. Would that he could handle it. That's his problem. He tries to handle it. He can't. Now, addiction is progressive, and once contracted, it progresses until death, even though you can stop or arrest the addiction. The addiction is still there, and it worsens when it is gone back to. But we'll see about that in a minute. Here, I think, is Dr. Green's genius. He does the obvious. He shows that alcohol is a sedative drug by comparing its action with that of an accepted anesthetic drug, ether, which, like all sedatives, interferes with the oxygen supply to the brain and puts it to sleep. The brain, as you know, is an organ composed of parts that control functions. I realize this is simplistic for any of you who may be connected with medicine, but this is the way it was presented to us. It's the way we understood it. It's the way I pass it on to you. The outermost part of the brain houses reason, the intellect. Beneath that, the emotions, the imagination, the memory. Deeper still is that part controlling your motor activity, the movement of parts, your arms and legs. There are the semi-voluntary functions, like the blinking of your eyes. At times you have control over it, at times a gust of wind, you blink involuntarily. There are purely involuntary functions, the action of your stomach and your intestines. And then from the Latin word vita, life, there are those functions essential to life, which we call vital, your heartbeat and your breathing. Now, the brain goes to sleep from outside in. It can be done almost instantaneously, but step by step, that's the way it goes out. Everybody here also has some notion, and correct, I'm sure, of adulthood or maturity. An adult is somebody with a sense of responsibility, or one who tries to fulfill a sense of responsibility. An adult is someone sensitive to the sensitivities of other people. Cardinal Newman's classic definition of a gentleman, one who does not consciously cause pain. Dr. Green's definition, one who functions this way. According to the formula I over E, his intellect controls his emotions. Going along with the entire school of scholasticism founded by Aquinas, man is a rational animal. Now let's see what happens to that formula when the brain that controls it is interfered with by adding a drug to it. First of all, there's a dryness in the throat. It's highly absorbent of moisture, dries out those mucous membranes, and you get this vague sense of suffocation. You want to rip the mask off and gulp fresh air. But before you can do that, you feel good. Whee! Get the picture. You have just left your room, clad in what is euphemistically called a hospital gown. I think they're obscene, personally. Then they put you on a hard metal cart, and guess how you get to the operating room? No one has ever explained to me, from hospital designer, administrator, doctor, or nurse, why in the most modern hospital, where they perform surgery all day, every day, there's no such thing as an elevator for surgical patients. You go down on a public elevator. There are always about 3 or 4 clowns doing one of these on you as you go down. Then they wheel you into the operating room where there are 6 ghouls. And they're standing there in cap, mask, and gown, and guess what color? You know, some psychologists have earned their doctorates writing theses on color and how it affects morale and so on and so forth. After 92,000 launderings, these hospital gowns now are vomit green.